origin of conflict. It begins with the separation of man from God. With the alienation of the individual from God, the separation of man from God, came the struggle on the individual level. Let me explain why. Each of us has an inner spiritual nature and an outer physical form. Our physical body's concern on a daily basis is the self, is it not? Our body thinks of food, sleep, procreation, comfort. Now, that in itself is not evil. It's that our body should be guided by the mind, the inner nature, which has a conscience and is sensitive to the well-being of others, the purpose of the whole. We have a spiritual nature that is sensitive to higher good and the concerns of others, and it should master the physical nature. However, when humanity became alienated from a higher spiritual center and became centered not on God but upon self, then the physical nature takes primacy and the concern for self becomes supreme. And so we see from that individual level conflict where desires for the self arise, food, sleep, sex become primary. That's the individual who makes unstable families. That's the individual who makes conflict with neighbors. That's the individual who can't be patient. I was on an airplane coming back from the Middle East, and a woman came in at the last moment with her bags, and there's a space above this one man, but they had to move his bag. Sir, could we move your bag? No, that's your problem. That's her problem. I want my bag there. So such an individual will form family-level conflict, as described in the Scriptures, leading to the conflict between brother and brother, as described in the Scriptures. And so the roots of conflict and violence begin on the individual level and have developed to the family, tribe, nation, and world. Selfish patterns have expanded from the family level to the world. And you can see many examples. Lack of self-control, dishonesty, lack of faithfulness, sexual promiscuity, domestic violence, disrespect for the opposite sex, infidelity and divorce, stealing, murder, strife, etc., etc., etc. Just a word about the historical role of religion. Why has Reverend Moon invested so much effort in calling leaders of faiths to transcend our religious barriers and focus on the fundamental values of family, of love? Because the vessel originally intended to convey truths and values to the world was not religion. There was no intention for mullahs and pastors and rabbis. The family was to be the foundation for ethics, values, and tradition. But with the fall of the family, religion became the vessel carrying values and traditions through which cultures have developed and civilization has flourished. Where do we pass our values to our children, do we not? But where do we get those values? Because they are not enshrined in ourselves, embodied in ourselves, we get them from religion. And here in America, even if you're not a Christian, at Christmas time, people feel peace. The culture, the values have come from the culture which came from religion. And it's the same in your culture and everywhere in the world. Families inherit their values and traditions from religions and religious culture, passing them on to future generations. So religious activity has a central role. It's a restorative vehicle. Religion traditionally promotes personal discipline, exalting the spirit, controlling the desires of the body, restraint and patience, justice and righteousness in relationships, love of neighbors, love of enemy, loving others as myself. So the root is family breakdown. It should be obvious. If you've studied in college, Psychology 101, basic psychology. Family breakdown leads to psychological conflict in the individual. Sociology 101. Family breakdown leads to destabilized community and society. There's statistic upon statistic. Here from America. The United States currently, my own country, and is exporting this corrupt culture to the world. The U.S. leads the world in the percentage of single-parent homes, leads the world in the abortion rate, leads the world in sexually transmitted diseases, teenage births, illegal drugs, and the size of our prison population. Family breakdown is currently the United States' great social and moral crisis. This is from the United States Census Bureau, the record taken of all families in America every 10 years. In the last 30 years, the rate of marriage has declined by a third, while divorce doubled. Married couples have declined by a third with children, while out-of-wedlock births have tripled. Couples living together without marriage has increased by 1,000%. Young people think, well, I don't trust commitment anymore, so I'm going to live with this person to see if we fit together, if they make me happy. You know, before I buy a car, I drive it around the block, kick the tires, test it out. But amazingly, couples that live together then marry divorce 7 times more than couples who build their marriage on commitment and faith and higher values. Couples that marry after living together beat their spouse, abuse their children 10, 15 times more than marriages built upon faith and commitment and higher purpose. This is all statistical. The breakdown here in America and around the world. Divorce in America is the #1 cause of childhood depression. Family breakdown, the #1 cause of suicide by young men. Children of divorce, and by the way, none of what I'm saying is meant to be an indictment of any who've struggled to make a marriage work. We all fall short, and we all struggle. And every difficulty in our lives should become wisdom for the future. But sociologically, children of divorce are more likely 5 times to be suspended from school, 3 times more likely to need psychological counseling, twice as likely to repeat a grade. They're absent, late, and sick more often because of an unstable, emotional, social environment. Children born out of wedlock account for 75% of young people in drug programs. This is America. 63% of all youth suicides. 75% of young people in jail are young people raised by one parent. This is not an indictment of single parents. But anyone here who has had that experience will tell you how much more difficult it is to play both roles alone. How much more stressful and difficult and challenging to try individually to raise a child. So, what we learned this morning from those 3 ideals of individual maturity, family stability, and true relationship with all things is that personal maturity should precede marriage and family. The foundation for stable families is personal maturity. A person of character, conscience, and integrity is the basis of a loving family. But nothing in the universe starts perfect. In the natural world, all things grow by natural law. But in the human world, it takes not only the natural law by which we are hungry, by which our body grows, but our character does not develop automatically, does it? The development of our character requires effort and responsibility. It requires nurturing, parenting. We have a portion of responsibility to mature and raise our own self. Every one of us, our life is shaped not only by our own choices. How many of you chose the country you were born in? How many chose your face, your parents? How many chose your talents and your abilities, or the year, the age you were born? Sorry to say, but 95% of our life is decided before we even have a chance to act. That destiny shapes who we are. But have you ever heard the saying, who you are is God's gift to you? What you make of yourself is your gift to God. It may be small, but how we utilize our position, how we utilize our strengths, our talents, our abilities, the things we are born with, the country we live in, the blessings that have come to us, that's our portion of responsibility, as is enshrined in the Scriptures and as is our human experience. And so what I'm saying, are we okay? Forgive me for the barrage of ideas. When I took a sermon class at Union Theological Seminary, the teacher said, I came for a glass of water, but you opened the fire hydrant. What we've seen in the truths of the world's faiths and the cultural myths is that our original ancestors did not fulfill their original responsibility, growing and maturing and realizing their potential. There was a period of responsibility to a higher authority. And once reaching maturity, we should not be guided by fear, by restrictions, by limitations. The Scriptures teach that the words of God should be written in the heart of human beings, should be written here. The Scriptures even say the time will come when you no longer need to gather and talk about me, because I'll live with you. I'll be in you. I'll be part of you. I'll be among you. However, without reaching that full potential, without realizing that stable, unchanging love in which we're free to express ourselves, humanity went in the wrong direction and went outside the laws of the natural world, contradicting the principles of living for others and serving a greater good, and became self-centered. One more brief social reference. In American society today, and I'm sure you'll see it in Russia, in China, and all over the world, when young people, before reaching maturity, engage in sexually intimate behavior, become conjugal, act as mature adults should before they're mature, the consequences are devastating. Here are the behavioral risks associated with the loss of virginity in 12 to 16-year-old males. Young boys from 12 to 16 who remain virgins abuse alcohol. 22% have experienced alcohol, 18% cigarettes, 6% marijuana, 3% run away from home, 11% have had a run-in with police, 7% suspended from school. And this for girls, this figure for girls in America, 3% of 12 to 16-year-old girls who remain virgins attempted to take their life. Now look at the same figures for those who were sexually active. Now this does not mean that sexual promiscuity causes these behaviors. What it does reflect is that the emotional instability that leads young people to seek for love in the wrong places is connected, drives other destructive social behaviors. For non-virginal young people, 3 times the abuse of alcohol, 3 times the abuse of cigarettes, 6 times the abuse of marijuana, 3 times running away from home, 3 times run-in with the law, 5 times more suspended from school, and 10 times more often try to take their life. We could learn a lesson from the Genesis story. We could learn a lesson from Pandora's box. We could learn a lesson from these intuitive truths. According to Dr. Thomas Licona at the State University of New York, the effects of early sexual experience lead to anxiety about AIDS, sexually transmitted diseases, regret It wasn't what was expected. It wasn't. A teen magazine in the United States did a survey, and 80% of young people who had sex before marriage said they wish they never had. It wasn't what was promised to them. A loss of self-esteem, guilt, the corruption of our viewpoint of the opposite sex. We begin to see the opposite sex as objects rather than brothers and sisters. Shaken trust, fear of commitment, rage over betrayal, depression, even suicide, and friendships turned sour. Not to mention the stunting of our emotional growth. What about the physical results of sexual promiscuity? In the 1950s, there were 2 well-known sexually transmitted diseases. In the 1990s, explosion. We know the problem of AIDS and the threat to many of the world's countries, where in some countries 20 to 25% of the population is expected to be decimated. According to the Centers for Disease Control, almost 1 million Americans live with HIV, and most of them are not yet aware. According to the UN AIDS Project, 15,000 new cases of HIV every day, 1 every 5 seconds. You know the reality that recently the Centers for Disease Control says even if you have sex with 1 person, it's like having sex with 280 people because of sexual promiscuity in our day and age. But HIV is not the main problem. For every single case of AIDS in the US, there are 300 others, STDs. 20% of Americans have an incurable STD and don't know it. And condoms are often ineffective. Genital herpes, 20% of sexually active people are infected. There is no cure. Chlamydia, no symptoms, condoms have 0 effect. Many other examples the same. At risk is our youth. The greatest risk of infection, less tolerance, harder to treat. Also, sexual immorality and sexual promiscuity leads to a distorted view of marriage, comparison to past partners, infidelity, the problem of STDs, and the tendency toward divorce. Not to mention rape, domestic violence. All of these things have exploded with the breakdown of the traditional family. Unwed motherhood, and a culture of uncommitted sex that encourages predatory relationships using the opposite sex, pressure to consent, and the loss of any sense of modesty. The loss of innocence for our children. Let me come to a conclusion. This is Peter Kreeft in his book, Ecumenical Jihad, Ecumenism and the Culture War. How do you destroy society? Destroy the family. How do you destroy the family? Why the family is important? This is very crucial. It's the only institution where most of us learn life's most important lesson, unselfish love. How do you destroy the family? Destroy marriage. How do you destroy marriage? Destroy fidelity, commitment, lasting love, and you break the society down. I would imagine that everyone in this room, if I asked you your greatest joy in life, I bet it's about love. And if I ask you of the greatest suffering that you or your family members have experienced, it's probably also about love. Misused, unrequited, irresponsible, abusive. Love. Love, it's through love and sexuality that we express our highest ideals. We reproduce life. We connect to lineage. You've heard Reverend Moon, many of you, talk about love, life, and lineage. It is here where humanity has been distorted, has lost its way on the individual level through the false misuse of love and led to an evil history. Our original nature contains things like freedom and hope and desire and love. But when we center on the self, what happens to freedom? It becomes license freedom centered only on me is false and fallen. So we are not talking about evil as the complement of goodness. We are talking about human nature that's become distorted. And we see rape and murder, the killing of children, and things that are inhumane. We call them inhumane, not human. When hope and desire become centered on the self, it is greed. When love becomes self-centered, it is lust. So good and evil are a matter of direction, the false direction for mankind. The Constitution for UNESCO says this: war begins in the minds of human beings. Since this is so, the minds of human beings must also be capable of ending war. I believe we have it in our power if we can correctly identify the root of the problem as the ancient wisdom of our cultures, as the truths at the heart of religious teaching are saying to us. Not some mystical story of a fall, but the reality of our families and our lives today. I hope that message got across. Thank you very much.